Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Simone de Beauvoir continues her discussion of the relationship between the present and the future for free human beings in the section that has that title in the third part of the Ethics of Ambiguity by talking about the finite individual and various totalities and the temptation to lose themselves within these and thereby, you could say, misuse and misunderstand their freedom. And so she talks about the need to safeguard what she calls the sense of finiteness. And what does that mean? Well, sense can also be understood as meaning, right? So, that's important. She also says that this isn't really going to be a problem in ancient times. She actually talks about the Greek cities and the Roman Republic willing themselves in their finiteness. Why? Because now, is this completely accurate? It's a good generalization. She says the infinite which invested them, surrounded them, was for them only darkness. They died because of this ignorance, but they also lived by it. There was a notion that in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, before the coming of, say, Judaism and Christianity, the finite was understood as what was, good, and the infinite was understood as something bad. We'll put that aside for a moment. Where's she really going with this? She's saying, now we've got some serious problems in our contemporary culture. She says, today we're having a hard time living. Why? Because we are so bent on outwitting death. Now, she doesn't just mean physical death, right? There's a lot of that. People are quite worried about, what's my legacy going to be, and how can I survive on after my death? And there's even, an entire movement of people who believe things in the present, like I'm going to upload my consciousness and evade death in that way. Not really a possibility in her time, but she's talking about something rather more broad. And she frames it like this. She says, we're aware that the whole world is interested in each of our undertakings, and the spatial enlargement of our projects also governs their temporal dimension, right? Now, not everybody has the entirety of the world looking at them at any given time, but one can feel like that, right? There can be this spatial and temporal enlargement of our projects. I mean, just consider what I am doing here. People all over the world are, for quite a long time, are going to hear my voice if they're looking at a video, see my frame at a certain time, and depending on, how the media that we're recording this in survives, maybe it'll, continue on long after my death. That's, we're trying to understand Simone de Beauvoir. We're reading a book here and commenting on it of somebody who's been dead for decades, right? So, we could talk reasonably about this as being a case. And she says that, the more the viewpoint of externality wins over that of internality. So publicness over the individual. And the idea of externality carries with it that of quantity, right? So the scales of measurement have changed, space and time have expanded around us. Today it's a small matter that 1 million men in a century seem to us only a provisional moment. But, she says, that hasn't actually changed anything. Not at the level of the individual. The individual is not touched by this transformation. His life keeps the same rhythm. His death does not retreat before him. You can't evade it, right? That is finitude. And he extends his control of the world by instruments which enable him to devour distances and to multiply the output of his effort in time. But he is always only one. You can drive farther, you can communicate more easily. We live in an amazing time as far as like the connectivity of our networks, right? And the fact that we can actually reach each other, but there's still just one of you. And you're going to die. You're going to eventually encounter your limits. And she says, instead of accepting limits, the individual often tries to do away with them. He aspires to act on everything and by knowing everything. And she talks about this as sort of a dream of the 18th and 19th centuries of a universal science which would be a universal power. But this is just a dream. A scientist who would aspire to know everything about a phenomenon would dissolve it within the totality, the entirety of things. And a person who would aspire to act on the totality of the universe would see the meaning of all action vanish. So this is kind of it's not even a law of diminishing returns. If you try to comprehend intellectually or through action the totality, meaning disappears. Finitude disappears, right? So, that's a trap that people fall into. And she says that, as soon as you introduce the presence of the finite individual into the world, the reality of human being, a presence without which there is actually no world, no meaningful world, finite forms stand out through space and time. And in reverse, though a landscape is not only a transition, but a particular object. An event is not only a passage, but a particular reality. And she talks about Hegel. This is a very interesting phrase. Hegel denying the concrete thickness. We could call it the weight of the here and now in favor of universal space-time, which is arguably something that Hegel does. If one denies the separate consciousness in favor of mind or spirit, Geist, then we miss with Hegel what she calls the truth of the world. So she's saying Hegel's really got something wrong, and people who follow in his footsteps in that respect are also getting things wrong. They're evacuating the meaning of what it is that they want to get. And so she's going to talk about history and the universe as such, and humankind. And she says it's no more necessary to regard these as rational totalities. What is rational totalities? Totalities in the full sense that would be grasped by the reasoning subject. And she says if we actually want to understand what these are, we should follow Jean-Paul Sartre, her friend and companion, her classmate as well, whose work, this is actually in some respects a continuance of, and she says he's got this great phrase, detotalized totality. So there's still totalities, like, the universal of things, but they are detotalized. They are not simply a thing in, an infinite in which all the finite things are lost, right? So what would this look like? She says, with these, separation does not exclude relation or vice versa. So you have both separation and relation. She doesn't say of what, but we can, supply this, of the individual and the whole. So the individual is not the whole is not the individual. Individuals are separate from each other, and yet they are all in relation to each other at the same time. That's what gives the totality its weight, its complexity, right? So she'll say, here we go. Society exists only by means of the existence of particular individuals. No individuals, no society. That doesn't mean that society is reducible just to individuals, but, individuals matter. And she says, human adventures stand out against the background of time, each finite to each, though they're all open to the infinity of the future, and their individual forms thereby imply each other without destroying each other. So the meaning of my life as this person here in space and time is not restricted to what Hegel would make of it in absolute spirit. The totality of all of these minds in an absolute reconciliation, right? And she says that a conception of this kind does not contradict that of a historical unintelligibility, for it's not true the mind has to choose between the contingent absurdity of the discontinuous, right? So things seeming like not to make sense, and the rationalistic necessity of the continuous, everything holding together. We don't have to choose between those. Why? Because what mind is supposed to do, our minds, not absolute mind, but our finite minds, is two things. One is to, as she says, make the multiplicity of coherent ensembles. That's a kind of, technical term. We'll come back to that. Stand out within the unique background of the world, and inversely, to comprehend these ensembles in the perspective of an ideal unity of the world. What are those ensembles? Us. Ensemble means, something that is put together, right? We are finite beings that are complex, that are partly positive, partly negative, that are existing in time in relation to others in a world that we inhabit together. And so, mind is supposed to grasp both the world and to project an idealization of the world out there, but also to focus on the finite, existences, including itself, that are there in the world, that give it its significance or its meaning, right? And then she's going to make a really interesting point here. She says, whatever may be the philosophy we adhere to, whether our uncertainty manifests an objective and fundamental contingency, or whether it expresses our subjective ignorance in the face of a rigorous necessity, whatever we actually think about metaphysics, the practical attitude remains the same. We're constantly having to decide, to act, and to assess, and it's like a constant process. So she says we must decide upon the opportuneness of an act and attempt to measure its effectiveness without knowing all the factors that are present. This goes back to the detotalized totalities. Anytime that we're thinking about history, the meaning of time and what's going on, the universe as a whole, even what humanity is, we don't grasp all of it, and yet we do project out this ideal unity to each of them, which could be revisable. So she says that the scientist, in order to know a phenomenon, doesn't wait for the light of completed knowledge to break upon it, right? Instead, they go out there and they try to find things and they establish that knowledge. The person of action, in order to make a decision, doesn't wait for a perfect knowledge to prove the necessity of a certain choice. They choose and thus help fashion history, right? This is what it means to be free beings, and it implies, as she says, risks that must be assumed as such. A beautiful phrase here, the movement of the mind, whether it be called thought or will, always starts up in the darkness. And she says, you can debate if you want to, is there a science of history, something that actually makes complete sense of it or not? The only time we'd know that is at the end of the history, right? Hegel, if you remember, is saying in the Phenomenology, I can actually take this stance because history's finished, right? Obviously, he misjudged that. And she goes on and says, from the political and tactical point of view, there's really no difference between a doctrine of pure dialectical necessity and a doctrine which leaves room for contingency. Where is the difference? It's in the moral order, in ethics, in how we choose, right? She says, in fact, the one who asserts the unity of history recognizes that these distinct ensembles stand out within it, and the one who emphasizes the particularity of these ensembles admits they all project against a single horizon, right? Just as for all there exist both individuals and a collectivity, the affirmation of the collectivity against the individual is opposed, not on the plane of fact or of theory, we might say, but on, as she calls it, the moral plane, to the assertion of a collectivity of individuals, each existing for themselves. And she says, so we've got, individuals and the collectivity of humanity. We can also do this, she says, for time in its moments, right? We believe by denying each individual one by one, we would eliminate the collectivity. And she says, this is how people actually go wrong. And she's going to give you a prime example of this in the realm of politics and conflict. She says, the attitude of England in regard to Spain, Greece, and the Palestine is defended with the pretext she must take up a position against the Russian menace in order to save, along with her own existence, her civilization and the values of democracy. But a democracy which defends itself only by acts of oppression equivalent to those of authoritarian regimes is denying all those values, whatever the virtues of a civilization may be. It immediately belies them if it buys them by means of injustice and tyranny, right? And so she says this is an example of projecting something out there that doesn't actually add up. And she goes after the Russians as well. The triumph of Russia is proposed as a means for liberating the international proletariat, but that's become an absolute end for all Stalinists, right? So this is what she means by talking about on the moral plane. How is the individual, the finite individual, related to the totality? And here's where we really need to go a little bit beyond what she's explicitly saying here and think about what's implicit in this. It is only individuals, granted, within collectivities together, who can actually think the totality that they would be willing to subordinate finite individuals to. So anytime that you're, affirming history, humanity, the universe imposes a necessity upon us that must crush the individual or, thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals, there's something inconsequent to principles going on there that needs to be looked into. So that's what's going on in this discussion of finite individuals and the totalities that they find themselves within, whether that of the human race or of history itself, the movement of time, or the universe as a whole.